Welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast, the podcast about gaming and being a geek by two 40-something geek dads. I'm Ken Newquist, and all I want to do is curl up with a good book. Well, maybe like a pile of books. Certainly less than a horde of books, but certainly not by much.
And I am David Moore, and I've been sleeping in the 8th library lately, catching up on reading and media. So evidently I have taken your dream lately, at least in this last week or so. So go ahead and tell us about the books that and things that you want to read.
Yeah, so I have really been assembling this horde. It's kind of funny. Like you sit down and all of a sudden you realize like you have this stack of. I guess it's also a search of books as I kind of secret them away in Goodreader. But in any case, so I am currently reading Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline, which is obviously the follow-up to Ready Player 1, also by Ernest Cline. And it's probably about what you would expect. It's more video game nostalgia. It's more fetch quests. I would say it's not as good as the original. Although good is highly subjective in this context. I think he does some good things in terms of inclusiveness. But I was hoping for more out of the book. Like, I don't know. I think he's got his shtick and he is doing his shtick, and it is enjoyable such as it is. His main character makes some dubious decisions. I'm just not. I'm stuck on the last like 10% of the book for the last couple of weeks, just because I haven't sat down and finished the stupid book.
like dubious as in dubious out of character, or dubious as in why would you make that choice? But it would be possibly in character.
I think this is one of these things. So here's the thing, right? And so. First of all, in Ready Player 1, you have the main character, Wade, is going up against Big Evil Corporation. Big Evil Corporation makes lots of dubious moral choices, including some just outright terrible moral choices. At the end of Ready Player 1, I don't think this is a big spoiler, Wade wins. And now he and his friends they're the ones who can own the corporation. They're the ones who can make the decisions. And so, unfortunately, at the beginning of the book, Wade is starting to make bad decisions, which sets up some of the conflict that drives some of the story. But he's doing things like, okay, so if you're the equivalent of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, and you can go in and look at any particular individual's user data, would you do that? Like, no. Right? Like, that is a bad choice. You shouldn't go out and look at people's information just because you can, right? Evil corporations do that. I work in IT. That would be irresponsible. You only do this sort of thing when you must do this sort of thing because someone has said that you need to go in and do it, because there are reasons why you need to go in and look at user data is appropriate for debugging or some other situation. There's been a breach, right? But you always do it with the highest regard for the user's information, right? And so it just rubbed me wrong that, cool, you fought the big evil corporation and won. But now you're in this position, and with infinite power comes infinite responsibility, except, I'm just going to go off and look at user information. And there's a couple of other choices that are dubious like that. Like, you have infinite cosmic power within the system, and he's going in and like basically bullying other users in the system who badmouth him. And all of this, I think, was meant to describe how like Wade is still a young kid. He's like, I think in this book, he's like 20 or something like that, right? We all made boards,
But he never really reflects on hey, this is what was done to me in the last book. Maybe I shouldn't do it to other people. Right.
And so part of it too is, it suffers a little bit from the Superman 2 phenomenon, right? Like, you've got Superman. You need to depower Superman so that he has a challenge to overcome, right? Like, you've given your hero infinite cosmic power. You need to strip him of his infinite cosmic power so that you may have, like, you can provide him with challenges because you don't know how to write for Superman.
Well, I mean, Ready Player 1 wasn't written with a sequel in mind. I'm supposing, but it certainly doesn't read like it was written with a sequel in mind, with how awesomely Wade wins at the end.
Right.
Like what's the downside? Like, yes, life continues on, which is kind of like what Ready Player 2 is sounding like from you for me, but it doesn't sound
right.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it was planned as a life continues on, let's keep telling the story. It was Ready Player 1 was really successful. maybe if we write a sequel to it, it will be pretty cool too.
Right. And I will say, like, from a spoiler situation, all the stuff I discussed for Ready Player 2, that all happened, I think, within the first chapter, right? Like setting up Wade has come into his own and what does he do with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, it rubbed me wrong. Like the setup, like, I don't know that we needed. It is more, if you liked Ready Player 1, there will be things about Ready Player 2 that you very much enjoyed. I think I agree with you. I suspect the only thing that Ernest Cline had going into the sequel was a title, Ready Player 2, because obviously that's what the sequel would be called, right? Me personally, I could have seen flipping it and Ready Player 2 being about the person who takes on Wade, right? Because he's the antagonist now. He made bad choices because he is just a teenager with infinite cosmic power. Set that up as the dynamic. That might have been a more interesting story.
Yeah.
You know, like the redemption quest of Wade because he has lost his way. But in any case, Ready Player 2, it's not a very, the most amusing thing about Ready Player 2 for me is nothing about the book. When I ordered the book, I accidentally ordered the large print version.
I remember you, I think posting that on Twitter at one point.
Yeah, so you know it's hilarious. Like I get the book, I'm like, oh, this is a little beefier than Ready Player 1. Like this is gonna have there must be more story here. And then I pull it out and I'm like flipping through the text and I'm like, why is the text so big? I look at the cover and it says, large print format. Which I am sure I am not the only 48-year-old geek out there who can benefit from a large format book. And certainly I have not had to use my reading glasses while reading my copy of Ready Player 2. I just don't, it was not a conscious choice on my part. I would rather have the readers and read a normal sized book than get the large format book. Yep. But you know, if you get it, if anyone out there, if you got the large format book, not judging, I just, it was not something I meant to do. So other books that are on the pile that are kind of stacked up behind Ernest Cline is Star Wars, Thrawn Ascendancy, Star Wars, Thrawn Ascendancy. I can't say Ascendancy. Thrawn Ascendancy, Book 1, Chaos Rising, which this may be the longest Star Wars book title that has ever been released. It's ridiculous. I don't care because it's Thrawn. It's Timothy Zahn. Like, this is Star Wars for me, so I can't wait to delve into it.
It's weird. Like a lot of the Thrawn stuff came out and is considered legacy now, not canon. Yes. So I'm wondering, but Thrawn is canon because he was in Rebels. So I'm wondering how much is going to stay the same from legacy and how much is going to change in like is this the first Thrawn book in the Star Wars canon? The new Star Wars canon? No, this is the second trilogy. No, this is the second trilogy. Okay.
So they did the first 3 books kind of reintroduced. It was Thrawn's origin story within the new canon, right? Okay. And so how he how Vader finds him, how he meets Vader, and then there's some flashbacks that include the Clone Wars. And it's pretty good stuff. I think I enjoyed the first book and the second book, the first and third books in that trilogy the most. But overall, I think he does a really good job with it.
Now, Thrawn was in the Legacy series. Thrawn was the one that had where the Asalamiri, the Force pushing away lizards, and the clone of Luke and the clone of the Emperor.
Yes.
With the
although you're remembering you way better than I am.
With the extra vowels. That Luke.
Yes. Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So those were those books. And so I haven't actually gotten to that part of Rebels to see where he shows up. And I know he's in Rebels, but I just haven't gotten that far along.
Toward the end of the series. And they do a really good job with him there. They don't talk about Ysalamiri or anything like that, but they do bring in his he has a lot of art and artifacts from other civilizations, but they don't explain necessarily why, like they do in the original trilogy books in the Legacy series. So I don't know how much people who are newly introduced to Thrawn will understand that by studying the artwork, he can understand how an individual from that society would act.
Right.
You know, I don't think they hint at it a lot, but I don't know that it is something that would get caught because it's explicitly it's explicitly revealed in the books, but it's not explicitly revealed in Rebels.
Right. And so he gets into that again in the first trilogy.
Okay. Cool.
And so the first trilogy is also interesting because Thrawn is this guy. He's got this intellect. He can learn about cultures through all of this research. And so even though the Death Star project is obviously this big Imperial secret, he's seeing signs that resources are being diverted. And so part of the story, which is kind of cool, is him realizing there's this mega project going on in the galaxy and he doesn't know what it is, right? Because he's rising up through the ranks. He's not, he doesn't start off as Grand Admiral Thrawn. So that's cool. I mean, I enjoy the books. I think I'm looking forward to reading this one. The next book I have on my pile is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, which if it were a real book would be like double the size of the pile because it's like 1,000 pages, 1,100 pages.
Or it could be really, really thin pages and a lot shorter.
Right. True. So this is the fourth book in the Stormlight Archives. It's big, epic science fiction. My son loves it. He and I've he's been reading it. He's actually not quite gotten done with it because he's learned. I think this is a very important thing for Neutron Lad. He has learned that when he loves a book, he should pace himself while reading it because it will be over and then he will no longer have it to read. When he was younger, he would solve this problem by just rereading the books like 5 times. But now that he's 14, he's matured a bit and he's actually savoring the book instead of just like blowing right through it. So, that's on the
rereading 1,000 pages 5 times takes a while too. So
yes, and I can't say that he reread the Stormlight Archives that many times. He did reread all of them over the summer in anticipation of this book coming out in the fall. So he's read them all at least twice.
I had that plan for the latest 2 Dresden Files novels. Like I like picked up a pack of I think it's like 1 through 5 on the Kindle. They had a bundle, like an omnibus edition, and then the actual book came out. I'm like, I'm going to read the actual book rather than reread. But
right.
So I have it. If I run out of stuff to read that isn't new, I will dig into those again because those were good and I could use a refresher on it. But
yeah, and so I also have The Children of Time by Adrian. I'm going to massacre his last name, so I apologize. This Tchaikovsky.
I don't know. It looks like Tchaikovsky or
Tchaikovsky.
I'm not sure.
It's in the show notes, so you guys can go and find it and tell me how we're actually supposed to pronounce it. I suppose if I did more research, Google would tell me how to do this. But in any case, this is like the blurb is epic story of humanity's battle for survival on a terraformed planet. And that was the hook that got me to add it to like one of the auxiliaries on my summer reading list. And so I bought the book and just, it's sitting there waiting to be read. And then rounding things out is The Saints of Salvation by Peter F. Hamilton. I really enjoy Peter F. Hamilton's work. This is epic space opera, transhumans battling against aliens intent on saving us so that we can meet their god at the end of time. Like they show up, scrape out your brains, throw you into a cocoon, and then, you get loaded onto one of their arcs and you travel to the end of time with them. Obviously, humanity is not super thrilled about this idea. And so we send off our spawn out into the various edges of the galaxy to try and like regroup after Earth is invaded. And now in this book, we are preparing, hopefully, to actually fight the big fight. So Peter F. Hamilton is great when he's doing big epic space opera. He's doing big epic space opera. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Cool. That setup sounds like someone heard about the Migo from H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes.
And then decided, okay, I can work with this.
Yes, I think they're perhaps slightly more benevolent in so much as they're taking us along with them. But
well, there's never really any reasons like that humans can understand at the time of why they're doing what they're doing. So
this is very true.
So yeah,
it's just brains in jars.
Yep.
So the other thing I wanted to just mention, my birthday's coming up. That's okay, guys. You don't have to send me any presents because by the time you get this podcast, I'll probably be 49.
Distinct possibility.
No, I will be 49 because I'm 48, going to be 49. I'll be 50 by the time this podcast comes out. But in any case, I'm kidding. We're getting into our release schedule, guys. Don't worry. But coming up for my birthday, putting together my birthday list. And so there's two things I'm interested in. Both are games for the Switch because I don't have enough games for the Switch. One is Fire Emblem, Three Houses. So I think I may have talked about this one before.
I think you did.
Fire Emblem is this epic Japanese role-playing game where it's like squad level armies. Like you've got 20 or different combatants that go up against other combatants, and there's these big epic stories and what have you. And I told myself I would not get this until I finished the version I had on the 3DS. And then I misplaced my 3DS. I have no idea where it is. It may actually be officially lost at this point.
Oh.
Misplaced is usually good for a month or two. After a month or two, you probably have to switch to just admitting that it was lost.
Yeah.
So with that said, that means I can get Fire Emblem Three Houses for the Switch because I still know where my Switch is. And the other one, which I'm thinking would be a great game for my son and I to play, and my daughter, if she wants to join in, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, The Black Order. So this is basically just like the whole Marvel superhero pantheon thrown into a video game that's kind of like got Diablo style gameplay. So
is it multiplayer?
It is.
Oh,
it is. So you can have at least up to two people playing at once. It may be more than that. I'm not sure.
Like if you connect multiple controllers, like you can connect up to four or eight controllers. I don't know how many.
Yes,
but that would be pretty cool to take a look at.
Yeah, so it's up to 4 players.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's up to 4 players. So Jordy and like my daughter and my son can easily join in playing this, and seems like a great thing to play over Christmas. And it's gotten pretty good reviews. Like one of my friends is a big Marvel fan like me. He's a big X-Men guy, and he swears by it. So, or at least previous iterations of it, not so much on the Switch. So I'm looking forward to it. Like getting Guardians of the Galaxy. It's got like all of the X-Men. Like I haven't played a good Marvel game in a very long time. This looks like it would scratch that particular itch.
Cool.
So you've got books too.
I do. Like I said, I was sleeping in the 8th library. I should have said the 9th library because my current book that I'm reading is Gideon the Ninth. Which is the first in a series. And I really like it. It's really hard to describe. It has a Warhammer 40K feel because it's in the theoretical far future. It may not even be like an Earth. It may not even be centered around Earth. It may be a complete alien civilization, but they're humans. But it's like there are 9 houses. The first house is the house of the Emperor, the undying Emperor. He died and became God, and then trying to remember how it's put. It's like God became the Emperor, and then the Emperor became God, sort of thing. And then that Emperor is off at fighting the front lines of the wars. But the difference is it has the feel of 40K a little bit with like the decrepitude of, the ages, and like they're not moving forward per se.
Right.
But it's not 40K because the other 8 houses they do different things kind of. Like they're like the 9th house is all about secrets, but each house, the leaders and such of each house are necromancers. So, but they all have slightly different necromantic powers. But each house also comes from a different planet in, I think, is a solar system, but it could be spread across the galaxy. It's like the world building is really cool, but it only gives you like little pieces at a time. And so you have to like build it up in your mind over time. And like at this point, like it feels like the 9th house is way out on Pluto. And they've been summoned to the first house's planet, and it's described as like basically a big blue and white marble. So it sounds a lot like Earth, But if you're going by the numbering, you would think it would be Mercury. You know, if you're going by the number of, but I don't know. But and the thing is that doesn't matter. Like it's the setting, but it's, you know, Gideon in this case is like a foundling, effectively a foundling that's been raised by the ninth house, but the ninth house won't let her go, and she's been trying to escape all her life, like since 4 years old or 10 years old or something like that. And she's, I think, 18 or 20 at the time of the book starting. And I won't get into more of that because, but it's interesting. It's a really good book. I've liked it. I've been reading it the last few days, and I am waiting for my Kindle to load. I'm halfway through, so it reads pretty fast for me. So I'm really enjoying it. So you know, it's unlike, you know, some of the other books, like I've mentioned in past podcasts, where it's like I'm really having a hard time getting past chapter 5 or something like that, and I'm like 2 days and I'm already halfway through the book, and I'm gonna probably spend several more hours tonight reading it. Just before this one, I finished a book in the Alex Verus series called Forged. It's the latest one. It's by Benedict Jacka. And the best way I can describe the Alex Verus series, Alex is basically if Harry Dresden were British and a diviner. But he has a lot of the same problems that Harry does, in that, like, the Council of Wizards in Britain really doesn't like him, or elements of the Council of Wizards in Britain really doesn't like him, and often tries to kill him. And so this is the latest in that series of novels. And it also, I read it pretty quickly. Well, you know, my wife said, "Can you angle the Kindle away so I can sleep?" You know, at one point. So that was good. And that series is still going on. Not sure how he's going to wrap that one up. But there's 10 or 12 novels in that series so far. So, and then before that one, I read Gentleman Joel and the Red Queen by Lois McMaster Bujold. I discovered the Miles Vorkosigan saga, which is, this book seems to be the end, like the capstone of that series. And I read it, it was a while back. They came out, she started writing them and they came out in the mid 90s, early 90s. But I didn't discover them until the late 90s, early 2000s. Every time I find out there's a new one, I've picked it up. This one does not deal with Miles. Like, he's in the book, but for the most part, it's about Miles's mother, who's nicknamed the Red Queen, and her. It's hard to describe. He's an admiral in the same military, but it's about kind of their budding love affair when they're in their 60s, sort of thing. Like, it's funny. Like, I enjoy her writing. There wasn't a lot of action in it, which is very different than most of the rest of the Miles Vorkosigan saga. Like, the Miles Vorkosigan saga borders on military sci-fi in terms of, like, how it goes, or borders on Ender's Game in some spots, like the stunner tests and stuff like that in Ender's Game, the training sessions. They're really good. It's a really good series, but this feels like she's, like, and life is going to continue on. Let me tell you about just a nice, simple story about this budding little love affair and all of these little problems that seem like in past novels would be the meat of the novel, of like these little budding problems would explode. Like there'd be an explosion of violence or whatever, or politics or something like that. But then they all just kind of like, yeah, and somebody else is going to handle that. Or they didn't really explode because life is just continuing on. It was a little disappointing because I wanted a Miles Verkosigan novel style story, but it was also a really good bookend as like, here is the finale. Life is going to continue on. Your heroes and their friends and their family are going to have a nice, pleasant life after you shut the pages of the book. It's like, okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, there could definitely be a value in that.
Yeah, like, I mean, after reading this series for almost 20 years, it's like, yeah, I can shut the covers and be good with the end of that.
Very nice.
Yeah, and the other one was just a very short novella, which I had actually found first. I was like, oh, she's got a new thing out, so I bought it. Didn't realize it was a novella, and like ripped through it. And then it's like, oh, it just ended. Well, does she have anything else? And then that's when I found the Gentleman Joel and the Red Queen.
Gotcha.
But that was Penrick's Demon. And that's a fantasy series that she's been writing. And the setup for it is they have... I feel like I might have talked with you about this one.
Yeah, I can't remember if we talked about it on the podcast, though, or if we talked about it just hanging out.
That's true. So the world has these things called demons, or that the humans there call them demons. Who knows what they are? There's some sort of spirit that can attach itself to a human, and the main character is riding off to be betrothed, and a woman basically has a heart attack with her retinue. This priestess has a heart attack on the road. He runs up to help, and effectively her demon transfers itself to him, and all sorts of stuff ensue from that. So I enjoyed it. When I have worked my way through a few more of the books that I still have yet to read, which I won't go into now, but when I've worked my way through what I still have on my Kindle, I will probably pick up, go back and find the start of that series and pick it up. But Penrick's Demon's a good standalone novella. So that's all the books so far.
The sad thing is I have even more books on my Kindle. Like I was looking through the list, like, oh, I bought that. I asked for another one for Christmas for my mom. Like, so there's going to be even more books.
Well, I've got like 5 other books that I know of on the Kindle that I want to read, and at least 2 Audible books that I just picked up because I keep getting credits. And if Audible is kind of nefarious in this, that if you cancel the subscription, your credits will expire and go away. But there aren't a lot of books that I want to grab on Audible at the moment. So I've still got 4 of them, but they also expire if they're more than like, I think, a year old. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pick up a couple of ones that I wanted to pick up. So one of which was a Carl Sagan book. And then the other one was, I don't remember. Like I remember, but it was the same. It's the same author that did the Becoming New York City book. But it's like 17 hours of audio, so it'll be a while. It's probably more of a spring or summer one when I go out on really long walks. So
exactly.
But other media, friend of the show, Natalie, she had mentioned Lower Decks at one point, and I was like, you know what? I really want to look at it. Let's see where it is. Oh, it's CBS All Access. Well, I have Prime. They give a 7-day free trial. What the heck? I'll take a look at it. and then proceeded to mainline both seasons of it within a couple of days because, working from home, I have a TV and a couch and a laptop. My neck really complains that I am working from the couch. I mainlined both seasons of Lower Deck, which felt a lot like Futurama meets The Next Generation.
I'd say that's accurate.
Which was really, I really like it. It's a really good series. My wife, not super fan of that sort of humor per se, but I liked it. And then after that, my Star Trek, need was itching. So I went and I started watching Discovery, and really found I enjoyed Discovery, and have watched all the way up through part 1 of a 2-parter in season 3. So I've mainlined from season 1 all the way to season 3.
That is a lot of Star Trek, I have to say.
Yes.
Like I did something similar with the Lower Decks and with the current season of Discovery to get caught up. But yeah, that's a lot of Trek.
It's a lot of Trek in 7 days, mind you.
Yes.
So it's like,
that's when you start dreaming about Star Trek.
Yeah, and I managed to do the bad thing of, well, not bad, but I had a choice of like, hey, what is your continuing subscription going to be? Is it going to have commercials or no commercials? And for some reason, I hit the commercials option, so my free trial had commercials too. So I've watched all of those, and then I wasn't super into Picard, but I was like, okay, I'm done with Discovery. What other Trek is out there? So I skipped to episode 4 or 5. I read the summaries, and then I skipped this episode 4 or 5, and then watched the last half of that series. And it was okay. It was an interesting story, but it didn't quite feel like Star Trek to me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, and that was part of what they were, I think, in some ways going for with Picard. I think part of it is just it doesn't feel like your Federation, right? Or it didn't feel like my Federation, right?
Right.
I want my Federation to be optimistic. I don't want my Federation to turn its back on the galaxy. I kind of have enough of that in the world.
Yeah, and
right?
And that's why Picard leaves in the beginning of the series, is that it's not his Federation anymore. But part of the thing that I don't like about it is they have this whole android uprising on Mars, and it's like, okay, well, no more synthetics, etc. And then, but everything else that I've seen, it seems like that's the reason for Picard's motivation, but it doesn't seem like it's something that's gonna continue on in other Star Treks. It's like, we're gonna have this really horrible thing happen, but it's not gonna necessarily persist in the persistent universe of Star Trek.
Right.
That's the way it felt. I mean, somebody totally could do it, but yeah, it seemed neat. It seemed kind of cool. I saw the ending kind of coming with what happens with Picard. They put Chekhov's howitzer on the mantle, sort of thing. But in typical Star Trek fashion, it's all neatly resolved at the end of the series.
Yes.
That everything's just fine now. So they don't talk about the weird space worms anymore because the portal closed, sort of thing.
Right. Right. Weird. I mean, I did, the part to me did enjoy seeing old friends, right? Seeing the touches back to Next Generation and Voyager was cool. And so I think that part of it carried me through. And also, I did not try and binge several years worth of Star Trek in 7 days.
Yes,
which I am in no way criticizing. I could totally see myself doing exactly the same thing. I had a very strange, weird trip when Battlestar Galactica was out, and I think I binged all of season 2 of Battlestar Galactica while down with a terrible cold, over the course of 3 days. And I'll tell you, folks, you do not want to watch that much Battlestar Galactica when you are not in your right mind. Right? It's that kind of terrible cold where you can't sleep, but you drift off and you're in this weird half dream state, and throw in Battlestar Galactica. Not a great mix.
Yeah, that would be a trip. That would certainly be a trip.
But I really enjoy. I got to say, going back to the lower decks, I really enjoyed the lower decks. I think it reminded me of John Scalzi's Red Shirts, obviously.
Yes.
And so it wasn't quite as much lower decks as I was hoping. Like they can't help but be Star Trek and like go off on like bigger heroic journeys. Like it's not just like the Office Space meets Star Trek, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was enough of that to be able to say like that it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was fun. I'll definitely watch future seasons of it.
Yeah. Like in terms of Picard, I think my favorite character in it actually was 7 of 9. Because she actually like has motivations and grows and like has her own thing at that point.
Right. Right.
And I would love to see more of that side of things.
My biggest complaint about Picard, and this isn't a super big spoiler, I don't know, but it suffers from the same problem that the last Star Wars did, which is somebody found the clone tool for starships. You don't need to have 20 billion starships on the screen at the same time, right? Like Return of the Jedi didn't have it. It still felt like it was an epic space battle, right? You don't need to have 20,000 starships.
Yeah.
Because you can't see 20,000 starships, so don't bring 20,000 starships.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we won't go into that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, but Discovery had a similar scene at one point during one of its seasons where like just all the starships show up. And it just, at some point, it suffers from the same thing that the Star Wars prequels suffered for, is there's too much happening on screen. You can't focus, right? It starts to lose some of its effectiveness because there is too much happening, right? And you can't keep track of the action because it's all just flying past your head. Yeah,
but between season 1, 2, and 3 of Discovery, you can tell that there was a big tonal story shift over those seasons. And I heard from one of our friends that like the showrunner changed between season 1 and season 2 and 3. And so you can definitely tell. Season 3, I liked a lot. I like a lot so far.
Yes, me too.
But like even season 1, which had a very different tone, still felt like Star Trek to me.
Yes,
in a lot of ways. So that was still pretty fun. Although it is more serial than episodic than Star Trek normally is.
Yes. But I did very much enjoy Captain Pike in season 2 of Discovery, and I'm glad that he's going to be back for Strange New Worlds. Which cool. is I don't know if you saw that, but it's going to be like the Adventures of the Enterprise with Captain Pike in charge and the crew of the Enterprise. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So I'm really looking, and it's going to be very much like, like classic Trek, right? Like you're going to have an individual. It's not going to be. So I always get serialized and episodic mixed up.
Serialized.
The stories are going to be more self-contained.
Okay, yeah, that's more episodic. Yeah, I always used to flip them as well. Like the serials going way back before we were born was like the movies, and they'd have a cliffhanger at the end, and then you'd have to come back next week and watch the next movie.
Right.
That's what serial normally means. So,
and I should remember that, and yet somehow I never quite do.
Constantly flip them in my head.
But anyway, yes, I'm loving the Trek.
Yep.
I look forward to more Trek. I'm glad that we live in a renaissance of Trek.
Yes, it is.
Warms my geeky heart,
and a good renaissance of Trek. So
yes, exactly. It's a good renaissance of Trek. So now I just need to find somebody to play, the Star Trek role playing game with, and I'll be good to go. But you're playing a video game.
I am.
I understand.
I had picked up a while back. I had sworn off early access for a long time. I still am. But then Gloomhaven came up in early access, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't have anybody play the physical Gloomhaven, and this was pre-coronavirus, like last year. But I was like, okay, well, let me give it a shot as single player, and I bought it, and I'm like, yep, it's early access. That's not great, and it just didn't have anything in there. But I was like, well, I do want to support the development of it, so I will let it sit. I won't be bitter that it's early access and I can't really play it like a final game, because it's not. But then just a month or so ago, some friends of mine were like, hey, I was like, hey, do you guys want a game? And it's like, yeah, we sometimes do, but we do get together and play Gloomhaven. It's like, oh, really? And so for the last few weeks, we've been playing Gloomhaven, and it's much better now. It's not great. It's not perfect. It's not a final game. There's still some interface issues. One of our players has a slow laptop, and sometimes their connection will drop. And up until this last Sunday when we played, we thought it might have been because of the slow laptop, but another player who doesn't normally play was also playing, and their game froze at the same time. So, but overall, it's pretty good. The fact that it saves after every turn, and you only have to maybe replay a turn if the game crashes, is really nice. Not like a whole adventure, because that would just be like, whatever, we're done for the night. Flip the table. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. You don't have to do the manual flipping of tiles and maps and stuff like that. You don't have to lay stuff out on the table, which if you're doing it in person would be a lot of fun, but if you're doing it over the internet, is not fun. So it's been a lot of fun. It's on Steam, which I've really enjoyed it there. I have Gloomhaven on what is it, Tabletop Simulator, but that is much more the board game version of it, and I think I like this one better. I like the Gloomhaven actual game. Up to 4 players. You can play up to 4 characters, but you don't have to, just because that's the way Gloomhaven is. We often play with 3.
Gotcha.
And we've just been leveling up different characters, or switching people in and out depending upon who's playing when. And it's been a lot of fun. A lot of fun. All right, so back in the game room here, the role-playing game room. We have a lot of.
They stretch on and on and on.
They do. It's actually pretty awesome. One day when we're all vaccinated with against Corona, maybe we'll all get together and have a little have a game room fest, otherwise known as a convention, where we'll all get together and game.
Yes, and then we will have to bring our stuff, and I guess that's the topic we want to talk about, right?
Yeah. So you wanted to talk about some of your GMing hacks and planning and things like that for more face-to-face gaming for the most part. Since the vaccine is now out, hopefully we'll actually be able to use them.
Yeah, it would be fantastic. It'll be I think it's probably going to be over a year since I've played face-to-face with anyone other than my son. That's not entirely true. We went on vacation. We played a little D&D with our friends over the summer in a socially distant, appropriate sort of way. But in any case, I have not played D&D with anyone other than 14-year-olds in the real world for a very long time. And the thing is that before we actually went into lockdown, I'm like, I'm going to get organized. So I have my game room, which if we ever do a live stream, well, I'll happily show you guys my game room. And I have all my stuff here. And for many years, my game room, my house was basically where the group would meet. But, things change and priorities change. And so I'm more than happy to go into other people's houses if it's convenient for the group, right? Or if it's convenient for that person. So you need to watch your kid, whatever, we just compromise and do that. The challenge is that if you're going to venture forth from beyond your own game room where everything is easily accessible, you need a plan for bringing stuff. And so many years ago, when my group was first playing and we would do this more regularly, just kind of rotate from house to house to house, I would have a series of milk crates and lunch boxes and other random things that I would just throw everything into. So I'm older or I'm wiser. I think I would get a little bit more organized, right? So my key organizing principle right now is the Plano case.
Okay.
Which I am hardly the only geek who has these, and so I think they're usually Plano is offers in a line of cases that are used for a variety of things. Often tackle boxes. I think most people probably end up using them either for crafts or for tackle boxes. I use mine to store game stuff. And they're cool because, so I have two different sized ones. I have a bigger one that is large enough to hold D&D books. And they have these plastic compartments that you can slide into them that you can then put things into that have little compartments, right? Oh, cool. And so you can just keep pulling things out. So actually, let me see. I have it next to me, so I can actually show you, even if I can't show everybody else.
Well, you could take some photos and put them up in our show notes too.
Yes, I will totally do that since it's actually almost organized now. And so I have one of these sets. You can hear the dice rattling. Ooh, sound effects. And so this is, I have one of these that has like all of my tokens in it. So it's got little jewels to serve as inspiration in Dungeons and Dragons. Also can be used as like plot points and other things in other games. Yep. I have a bunch of bennies, or poker tokens, poker chips, which serve for bennies and Savage Worlds and just also can be used as inspiration. I have a number of like small little fish tank jewels, like the little things that you'd put on the bottom of a fish tank. You can help describe them. Like beads, little glass beads, I guess is what they're called. So I have a red one and I have a blue one. What do they mean? Depends on the game. In Savage Worlds, they indicate a wound. Or they might indicate that someone has been shaken, right? In Dungeons and Dragons, well, you've got all these minis out on the board. Which ones hurt? I can't keep track of all the minis. Okay, boom. I just throw those down, and the red ones are the ones that people have injured. I have a bunch of 6-sided dice because, of course, you always need a bunch of 6-sided dice because you never know when you're going to need to cast Fireball. And then I have my Esoteric Dice because at some point we're going to do a dice episode, right? I got these at Gen Con. They are D12s with Roman numerals on them, numbered up to, I think, 4. And so these just become quick monsters, NPCs, anything to indicate, hey, there's a thing over there to where the die is. I have these cool... I want to make sure I got the... Inkwell Ideas puts out these great dice that are random dungeon generators. So
are those like the geomorph?
Yes. Yes, they are the geomorphs.
Okay.
Yes. And so the idea is if you're doing a dungeon, you just like roll the dice and draw it. And then, it's great for inspiration. And so I put all of my stuff in here. So the goal being that I can just grab the case and go. So other things that I put in here, I have an ancient copy of Hero Quest, which was a fantasy board game from, I think, the 80s.
Played that many times.
See, I've never actually played the game. I just own it and have used it for the last 20 years for miniatures.
Got it.
Because it has good miniatures in there. It has great miniatures in there. And so since my gaming group typically plays D&D, it has driven many of our fantasy encounters for many, many a year. I haven't figured out how to organize them yet. Our dungeon tiles, so Wizards of the Coast published dungeon tiles, which in theory are fantastic because you can just kind of like lay out your map. Like, they have art on them and they represent different rooms or dungeons or overland things. Yep. My biggest challenge with them is I don't actually know them well enough to just whip them out of the box and say, oh, yes, I need a forest path. Well, let me grab these 4 tiles, which is going to represent my forest path.
Yep. You either have to kind of like prepare and pre-plan to use those, or you have used them enough to go, yes, I have these things, let me just grab them.
Right. And so I've been thinking about, because they're available for Roll20 and they're a little bit pricey, but they'd be very handy with my Dungeons and Dragons game online. And so getting them for Roll20 might actually provide me with the opportunity to be able to start visualizing what's actually in the box. The other challenge with them is there are varying sizes. So some of them are big, like they're not all just like 10 by 10 cubes or 10 by 10 squares. They are varying sizes, which is cool because you can have cool scenery on them, but it makes it harder to kind of pack them into a box.
Yes.
So I haven't come up with a great way of transporting those things yet. So that's the stuff that goes in the box. The other stuff that goes in the box, and perhaps this is my most essential if we're actually talking like Dungeon Master or Game Master hacks, are index cards. I think I get the most mileage out of index cards out of any tool that I have for any role-playing game. I use them to track initiative, obviously, in Dungeons & Dragons. That's a huge thing. I use them for taking notes. I have different colored ones, and what I use the different colored ones for will depend on my mood, right? Sometimes the NPCs are green. Sometimes the monsters are pink. Like, it depends on how many cards I have left. I'll also use them to indicate status, right? So I think we've all had the situation when playing Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, of course, has all of these kinds of things, but there's conditions, right? Oh, don't forget, everybody, I cast Bless. So you all get an extra D4 this round. And then, of course, what happens? Everybody forgets that they cast Bless. Right up until the point where they rolled an 18 and they needed 20 to hit. And then somebody calls out, hey, did you remember? Right. So I just make a little tent and I fold them over my DM screen, and that helps people remember what the heck is going on.
Very cool. Yep. I use index cards a lot when running Fate to write down temporary aspects, or if someone has a boost.
Yes.
Or since mapping is not super critical in Fate as it would be in like D&D, we'll put out miniatures or glass beads or whatever as characters, but I'll do like, here is, zone 1 which is like the control center, and here's the people in the control center, and zone 2 is like the upper decks of this dirigible or something, and we'll have people there. And so because you basically can fire so many zones away with a ranged weapon, or you can move so many zones, it makes it easy to just cluster people in there. And if you're in the zone, you can move around as much.
Right.
And that's what I use them for is those aspects that are available for players to tap, things like that. So, and yes, lots of notes. I've taken to doing the notes there because I can kind of shuffle through them really quickly. And then after the game, I might, if there's anything that I need to keep track of, I can put it in a notebook, at that point. Or if I don't have time, I can just shove the whole thing of note cards into the notebook. And then, when I do have time, transfer them.
I will say that's gotten me into trouble. I used to do the same thing. And I found like I have to be, especially now that we're older and I'm not staying up until 3 a.m. working on my campaign after the campaign ended, right?
Yep.
Like I could do that when I was 25. Doing that when you're 45 is harder.
Yep.
And so I would just write all these notes down on the index cards, and I would shove them into a folder. And then 2 weeks go by, and oh wait, where the hell are my notes? Oh wait, they're on index cards. I can't read my writing. What the hell did we do 2 weeks ago? When we were in our 20s, it was also easier because we played every week. Sometimes we played multiple times a week. That was crazy, right? But every Friday, I knew the game was coming. Every Wednesday, I'd work on the campaign because that's when Voyager was on. To bring it back to Star Trek, right? I had my routine. I didn't have kids. It was easy to do all these things. And now, if I write my notes on index cards, I'm doomed. I still do it occasionally, especially when you're doing NPCs on the fly. But I guess I should mention it. It's a new piece in the arsenal is the bullet journal we talked about before. For my D&D game, that's where I'm writing my notes down, right? Because I was so horrible about staying organized.
That's this one right here for me. So yeah, I've got the same thing for the bullet journal for me. I've got our Brindlewood Bay games and all the mysteries and NPCs and stuff take up a fair amount. There's a D&D game that was supposed to be every other week, but we've only played once. Got the notes from that one. We've got our Army Corps of Engineers Special Ops Division Fate game that we're working that hunt down cryptids. I've got a fair amount of that, and then I'm in a Star Wars game that's the friends who I play Gloomhaven with. We're playing Star Wars D6, and so I've got my notes in there for that as well. So the journal is good, and the fact that the way you organize it with the index, so you can say,
yes,
on these are the pages for this campaign. And the fact that you don't have to section off 20 pages of a notebook and say, here's my 1 page of notes, and then there's 19 blank pages until the next campaign. Right. I really like that organizational piece of making an index for those different campaigns, and just saying, I skipped 20 pages. Here's the next section of it. It's pretty cool.
Right. So I have some other stuff that I throw in the box. When I'm playing Savage Worlds, I did back the Kickstarter, so I got all the toys. So I got power cards and status cards and adventure decks, so that goes in the box. Extra pencils, because you can never have enough pencils and pens when it comes to gamers.
Yep.
couple extra sets of dice. If we're playing in my game room, I think as we've discussed before, I have the Cup of Shame, which is a huge plastic pitcher I got at an Iron Pigs baseball game that is filled with dice.
And if someone forgets it, you get
yes.
Yep.
Yes. Pick your dice from the dice of shame. And they're the dice I don't use anymore, but can't bring myself to throw out. Because, I mean, God, who would throw out dice?
They're perfectly good, even if you can't read them and they're all chipped and, older.
Right.
But they've been around since you've been a gamer. So, it's nostalgia.
So what I might need to do, and actually, what I might need to do is just come up with the portable dice cup of shame, right? Find an appropriate cup that I can throw an appropriate number of random dice into. And then because it happens at cons too. So I haven't actually tried this. One of my other motivating factors for doing this was I really would like to go to more game conventions. Bought the cases. I started to get organized and then COVID happened. No one can go anywhere. So I just have spent the last year fiddling with my my set of tools, but ultimately I'd like to be able to go to a con and just be able to say I've got my generic RPG box, got this stuff in it, I throw a couple of role-playing game books in it that I'm going to run that weekend, and I have everything that I need to be at the table.
Yep. One of the things that I like adding into the stuff for physical gaming is I have access to a Chromebook. It's my work Chromebook, but unlike most laptops, it's completely sandboxed between work and anything else. So I have in the past logged in with my personal account, and most gaming materials are on PDFs these days. I have not taken it to a con. I will say that. I got it after cons were not a thing anymore, but it flips completely around. It's one of those it's one of those laptops that can turn into a tablet. Gotcha. And so I can read the PDF there. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is finding an inexpensive actual tablet and loading it up with every PDF that I own, because I can. They don't take up that much space. And then just taking that with me to a con. Right. I have to worry about battery power at that point, but I don't have to worry about my back.
Yes, this is very true. As we talked about before, with a case this big, wandering the halls of Gen Con, it's not going to be viable. I would take the smaller case if I were to do anything. Like the smaller case I have is I don't know, it's half the size of the other one. And so it's perfect for Savage World style books because those are smaller. I don't know what the actual format's called, more like folio style as opposed to your big, heavy.
They're about paperback. The size of the bullet journals, right?
Yes, yeah, that's about right. I mean, the latest iteration is a little bigger, but still, they're not overly huge. And honestly,
6x8 or something like that.
Right, and if I'm going to a con, I'm not going to play D&D.
Yeah,
I'm going to play any other game other than D&D because I can play D&D anywhere time here.
Yeah, I mean, the games that I have played, the cons where I've played D&D at, when I go to Gen Con, I have very rarely played D&D. Years ago, I tried Living City or Living Greyhawk, and I'm used to role-playing, sitting down and playing my character, etc. Whereas those living campaigns were, there's a saying that came out of Living Greyhawk was, I Greyhawk the room, or I Greyhawk the body, which means that I search it as thoroughly as possible to get all the stuff. Right. And that's not how I wanted to play. And so if I did play a D&D game, it was someone is running an individual game, and I'm going to sit down and play that person's adventure. And I've liked those. But like you, usually I will play D&D, when I was playing D&D pre-COVID stuff, most of the groups that I've been part of have not enjoyed my non-D&D games. They're we just want to play D&D, and so cons were always the place that I went to play games other than D&D. I'm with you there.
I mean, it wasn't always this way. In the early, the late 90s, early 2000s, when D&D 3rd edition came out, and the RPGA was still a force. They would run things like specials and opens and what have you, which were really good con games. And I think we've talked about them some before. And so it wasn't just Living City. Like Living City, I always had a kind of a similar feeling. Like it wasn't quite what I was into. Right. Some of those other games were great stories. And so over time, though, especially as the hobby has proliferated, the number of games that are out there is just so huge that, I want to play all the games.
Yeah.
But talking about tools, I use a laptop for my adventure notes. I use it for hit point tracking. I usually have a spreadsheet for D&D to keep track of it because it's easier. I've been using index cards a lot more for keeping track of hit points in 5th edition because I feel like the hit point totals are a little bit more reasonable and the game flows better. I haven't done as crazy complicated spreadsheets as I used to do for 3rd edition. I think there were also a lot of status changes in 3rd edition where numbers would go up and down a lot. And so I'd have to keep track of how people were being buffed and debuffed. And I just needed a spreadsheet to be able to keep track of all of the things. And I can get away with that on index cards now.
In 5th edition, if you go to sleep, you're back full.
Right.
It's not like the earlier editions. You and I are used to the editions of, hey, you got injured, and unless you have magical healing, it's going to take days or weeks for your character to recover.
Right. Right.
And if you narratively, that was kind of interesting, but it could also slow the game down, which is why I think they changed it for 5th edition to be more of, we're just heroes and we can get the crap beat out of us, but we're just fine the next day.
Right.
Kind of makes some of the situations that we used to deal with or set up even in as GMs not possible in this newest edition. It's like, hey, okay, we're going to have them slog their way through these what should be minor fights, but it's going to chip away at them, and then they're going to have the big bad, but they're going to be not full. They're not going to be ready for it at the end, over this epic week-long set of battles. Whereas in 5th edition, it'd be like, okay, well, it's a week. Okay, well, we'll just heal up after every day. No problem. Right. So it's a different feel. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different.
Right. And I think, they've got the hit dice that you can do after a short rest, and you can still do that kind of war of attrition if you just, if they're in a dangerous place and there's a lot of encounters and people just aren't recovering their stuff after a long rest, you can get to that. There is a little bit, though, the expectation there amongst the players, especially newer players, is that you're going to get it, right? Why didn't we get it? Why are we getting encounters every night?
Yep.
It's well, because you're in the Badlands.
Yep.
You're far from civilization. It's dangerous. Maybe you want to retreat to that nice little town over the hill. Not making you, but so it is still possible. But I agree. It's kinder, gentler in that regard. So the other thing that I use, and I find it's a very interesting to me why I do this. I don't actually know why. I use a GM screen for Dungeons and Dragons. Always have, probably always will. Savage Worlds. And occasionally other games, I always roll out in the open. I always I'm sitting there with the guys and I'm rolling dice and I don't have a GM screen. My notes are just kind of off to the side. And I think that's just because it's the style I developed when I was playing Savage Worlds, in part because I think we were learning the game together and we all wanted to see what the roles were. We were working through the math. And it's not like I cheat as a DM, as Dungeons when we're playing D&D, but you kind of you're holding your cards closer to your chest when you have that DM screen there. There's a little bit of a sense of mystery. It is a divide between you and your players, right? And you can stage stuff.
The Savage Worlds also allows for the players to, if I remember, I haven't played it a lot, maybe 2 games ever. I'd love to play again, but doesn't it narratively have ways for the players to say certain things exist or things like that? Like by spending a Benny, they can declare things, or that might be Hollow Earth Expedition that allows for that.
I think Hollow Earth Expedition lets you do that. I think Savage Worlds, I'm trying to remember. I think there might be some rules for that we've just never used. But I mean, I think that the bennies flow freely. It's a lot. It is fast and furious. Things tend to turn
Do you use modules like you would in D&D?
No.
Okay. Because Well, I never used like I had the DM screen. I've tried to use it before. It's really handy as a new GM because a lot of the tables are on there and you don't have to have them memorized. But after using them so often, they become, the screen becomes less useful from that standpoint. But we never had huge, like big tables to play at for the most part. And it would just, and we were shorter back then. Like, so if we were playing at a big dining room table, like, I'd have to like sit up to see my, or stand up, which is partly where I guess part of my GMing style is, because I do tend to stand a lot when I'm, especially con gaming. If I'm running a con game, I'll stand just to get the blood flowing and such. But like, I never really used the GM screen very often, but I also wasn't really running out of a module that I needed to hide from people. Right. And so, like, especially like a map, I'd be drawing the map as needed. And so they didn't really need to see, if they saw a fragment of a map, it was just a sketch of it, of what, could happen, sort of thing.
Right.
So I don't know if that's maybe the same sort of case, like maybe you did it if you were running modules back then, or
I don't know. I think I did, and so we're talking about habits that were developed when we were like 12-year-olds, right? So
right.
Part of it is, it has always been and always shall be, right? And so because I don't generally run modules, like occasionally I'll run canned stuff, but and I'll have my maps behind the screen. And so there is that, like referencing screens, but sometimes I'll just throw that into, I don't know. It doesn't come up that often. I think part of what it is in Savage Worlds, for me, I think I just end up being a much more dynamic DM. So you have, in Savage Worlds, uses playing cards for initiative, right? And so I have this oversized deck. And so I stand up and I like throw the cards around the table, right? Nice. Just kind of like you were in a casino, right? And so and like there's this very visceral reaction to just tossing the cards out, and everybody sees like, oh man, the Joker just came up, and like there's like a at the table, right? Or there's a groan when somebody gets a 2, and that happens every single round. So it's very dynamic. As a DM, you're constantly redoing initiative after every combat, or after every round of combat. I think there's also the dice tell a story in Savage Worlds because they explode.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I, as a DM, throw my dice down and people see 2 6s come up, like, oh crap.
Oh no.
Right. And then I roll it again. I get another 2 6s, and those dice just keep exploding. And you get to like a 58, and people are like, oh man, we're going to have to do some math. And this is really bad.
Yep.
Right. And you get in that dynamic, it feeds the emotions at the table. And it's not like we don't also do that in D&D. D&D just does it a little differently. And so I think part of it is just like how Savage Worlds evolved for me as a DM. And it's just interesting.
Well, I wonder also, one of the reasons why you might want to not have things like your roles out in the open in an older D&D game is, the players, like I've never been one to try and defeat the players, but I have certainly been one to try to not kill the players. Like, I made this encounter a little harder, or they aren't going after this encounter, or their dice have been really bad and my dice have been really good. Right. It allows you to kind of fudge the dice a little bit so that the story continues in a good way. I mean, you can still beat up on them and stuff, but like having someone just die outright, is not fun, in a lot of ways. I can totally see in D&D why someone, and I'm not saying that this is another reason for possibly having a screen, but I could see it being a reason to have a screen would be so that you can keep the game fun and tell the story that you all want to tell, and not have the dice dictate a character death. Whereas in Savage Worlds and other systems like that, death isn't as big a threat. Or as easy to achieve as older D&D games are. Like fifth edition, you can get like hit for a huge amount of damage. I mean, they do have like insta death scenarios still if you get hit for too much, but it's like, but it's not like I'm at -1, and then as each round progresses, I'm going to proceed down to -10, and once I hit -10, I'm dead. You have the death saves, and you can stabilize in the middle of it if you roll well. So, even 5th edition is a little kinder with death.
At least at higher levels.
Than the old earlier edition.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think part of it does give you a little bit of that fudge factor. You can read the table as a DM and see like if things are just going badly and people aren't having fun. It gives you a little bit of cover. I think Savage Worlds and Fate and other newer games give the players more ways to mitigate the risk and the damage, or they make failure more fun.
Right.
And so that people are willing to put themselves out there and to take bigger risks because of that. They know they can Benny it. They know that they're going to be rewarded for a Benny with Bennies because they were role playing, and the economy is just different. And so I think it just opens up the whole table more, at least in my experience.
Yep. I mean, they kind of the newer games, and even D&D now, which I would consider a newer game now as well. Yes. They discovered, over years and years of role playing, that there are not fun things about the role playing game, about role playing games that have been put out before. Let's fix those problems. One of the problems, and this still happens in D&D and other games, like one of the worst fun killers is losing your turn. And
yes, save versus do nothing, right?
Right. And that save versus do nothing, if you have one attack and you roll and you miss, I count that as losing your turn. Because nothing cool happened. You missed. Oh, well, try again next time. A lot of newer systems, those failures can be made into more story for you.
Right.
Or like in Fate Condensed, even if you roll horribly, you can still say, I want to succeed at my action, but at a really serious cost to something. And then the narration part, creating of the story there happens, which I find really cool, because that means that the player who rolled badly can kind of choose. They have the choice of, yes, I just missed, or no, I hit, but something is going to bite us later, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. So I think, to kind of like start to wrap it up a bit, I guess one of the things that we're talking about is your hacks and your hacks and tips and what have you, like the little things that you do during the game can be very much influenced by the game that you're playing, which is not rocket science, but that's very much the case, right? Like what I might do to facilitate a Fate game or to get that Fate vibe is going to be different than what I do for a D&D game. And I think what's interesting too is when you can combine the things that you learned in Fate and you bring it to D&D. Right. And you start using the idea of zones, right? Because if you're only ever doing a battle map in D&D, it limits what you could do. But if you're doing a big city fight and you're introducing like the different zones in the city as a way of being able to abstract out like the fact that this thing is happening like in the equivalent of Central Park, right? Which is harder to do if you're not doing theater of the mind, but you still want to have some representation, right? And so to pull those kinds of things in and cross-pollinate the games is pretty cool.
Yep. Totally.
So everybody, we'd like to know your tips and tricks. We are always welcoming feedback, and we always appreciate when you listen. So if you have feedback for us, you can send it to us at podcast@lairofsecrets.com or via Twitter at Lair of Secrets. That's the @ symbol and Lair of Secrets. You can also visit lairofsecrets.com and